Are we live? It says the Hangout on air is live, so I'm going to assume we're live. So hello, everyone. Happy New Year and happy Thursday. Welcome to our first broadcast of our spring series of Google Hangouts with PASA alumni. I'm your host, Alumni Relations Chair for PASA Network, Arlen Mendiola. Each month, I'll host a panel of PASA alumni through the use of Google Hangouts. Each time, we'll be talking about a specific topic that was voted on by current PASA students. Today, we'll be talking about navigating the challenges when moving to a new city for a position. As always, it is my hope that through the use of Google Hangouts, I am creating a platform that allows our PASA alumni to share their successes and knowledge with current PASA students, as well as other folks in the higher education community. So here's a rundown of what to expect in this Google Hangout. In about a few moments from now, I'll have our alumni introduce themselves. After intros, we'll have a conversation around the questions that PASA students submitted prior to this Google Hangout. After our discussion, we'll take questions from our live viewers on our Google Plus page. We'll then conclude with our final remarks. We're fortunate to have two of our wonderful alumni join us here today on the Google Hangout. We also had two PASA alumni who could not be present with us, but they did send in their responses ahead of time. So these two were Daphney Bitanga, class of 2009. She is the Assistant Director of Programming at Associate Students, Inc. at CSU San Marcos. We also had Brianne Chang, class of 2013, Student Services Advisor in the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Sciences at UC Berkeley. So throughout our discussion, I'll be sharing their responses when appropriate. So without further ado, I'll have our alumni introduce themselves. So name, year that you graduated from PASA, what's your current institution, your current office, your position, and what exactly do you do in your position?
That's quite a bit. Janet, do you want to go or?
Sure. Arlen, just remind me if I forget something.
Okay. Yeah, for sure.
So my name is Janet Lowe, and I graduated from PASA last year in 2014. And I am currently at Rutgers University, New Brunswick, and I work in residence life as a residence life educator. I do mostly res lifey stuff. I supervise a building. I supervise a staff. I do a lot of kind of committee work. And then my position is actually a split position, so I'm also the program coordinator for one of our undergraduate international student transition programs. But yeah, most of what I do is just a lot of meeting with students and doing crises stuff, and then right now we're doing a lot of recruitment prep.
Great.
Go Team Res Life, yes. My name is Amanda Dickinson Beirne. I graduated class of 2013 from USC. I have my water bottle, which I'll be drinking from quite a bit. I didn't plan it, though. It just happened. It was weird. And I currently work at Bard College, which is about 2 hours from the city of New York. It's in the Hudson River Valley, and I work as an area coordinator within the Office of Residence Life. And so I have 12 peer counselors. I have 14 buildings. It's about 900 students. And as Janet said, lots of res life stuff, right? Kind of anything and everything. Bard is a pretty small liberal arts college, and so we do a lot of collaborative work with student activities, with our Center for Student Engagement. And I also work quarter time, which is 10 hours a week, in our EOP office as an academic advisor, and so I have 10 first-year PASA scholars from New Orleans and Atlanta that I help sort of navigate their assimilation process, their academics, anything and everything, sort of as a first resource for them as a PASA scholar at Bard.
Great. So we'll transition into our discussion now. So I intentionally scheduled this topic for this month as several PASA students are beginning or even continuing the job search process. For myself, like I've been reflecting on, my own job search process, and I realized that this time, it's going to be different. For me, like the past 4 years, I've always held a position that lasted just a year. Like my first 2 years after undergrad, I did 2 service terms with AmeriCorps. And then after that, I did a graduate assistantship with the Career Center, and then now I'm here at Dornsife advising. And I think that, doing this job hunt now, it's very different. That I'm actually looking for a position, probably in a new city, that will last longer than just a year. That I'm actually laying the groundwork of my roots in a new place. So I've been wondering, at least for yourself, like how was this transition different compared to the one that you experienced while attending the PASA program?
I think for me it was different because I actually moved to Los Angeles for the PASA program from Japan. So it was I think I'm kind of used to transition. I definitely did not. If you'd asked me in January whether or not I would be in New Jersey, I probably would have been like, no way. Because the majority of the schools that I was looking at and places were all on the West Coast, because that's where my family is and where I had a lot of connections. It just happened that this was the right place for me. Yeah.
Yeah, similarly to Janet, I have moved across the country a few times. I was actually an older graduate student, to an extent as related to my cohort. I worked for about 10 years in between going back from undergrad to grad school. So the transition to PASA was huge for me because I hadn't been in classes. I had been working professionally, and so having professors tell me what to do, having less money, all of that, like that was really hard. And so the transition out of PASA to a full-time position again actually felt really comfortable for me. But similarly, before PASA, I was working as a resident director in San Francisco, and then moved from San Francisco to LA. So that was a little bit of a transition, sure, but not major. And then moving from Los Angeles, living in South LA to living in the Hudson River Valley, which is considered upstate New York, was a major transition. Everything from the weather, it's really cold right now, getting used to all of that stuff, right? But I think the rhythm of, you get to really choose your time, whereas in grad school, I think you run from one thing to another. You have this assistantship and you have your time with friends, and you have to finish your classwork, and your weekends are sort of mushed with all these other things. The transition to sort of having a weekend again and figuring out what that meant, and figuring out if I actually had hobbies, because I didn't have many hobbies during PASA. Like my hobbies was like reading the Chronicle and like ridiculous things like that, right? So remembering like that I like to read, and having a different use of your time. I think grad students, or at least I did, and some folks that I knew, we sort of prided ourselves on like being schedule people, and we went from one thing to another. And I think you still do that very much in a full-time position. It's just a little bit different. Your Saturdays hopefully are kind of your own to an extent, even though you might be taking some work home, or you might be thinking about that project that you procrastinated on. But you get to choose your time a little bit differently. And that was a pretty big transition for me. Yeah. And I think also a different transition to being in a different kind of school. USC was massive, right? And I'm at a school that has barely 2,000 students. And so people knowing your business in a really good way, but also in a way that you're like, how did you know that? Because you're that much more visible on campus, right? When you live and work at Res Life, people see you all the time. Whereas if you're at a really large institution, yes, you still see folks at the campus center and you see them, on Truesdale, but it's a little bit different when you're at a smaller institution, to an extent.
Hmm. So it's interesting with Beirne and Daphney's responses, because they kind of touch upon their experience with their cohort. So let me see. So with Beirne, she said that the nature of the PASA program allowed me to connect with several colleagues and offices across the USC campus and provided a strong professional and social network in Los Angeles. When transitioning to a new campus with a graduate program attached, you have to be intentional about building your networks. Join a campus-wide staff organization seek out local chapters of professional organizations, or join a social club / meetup. I think for Daphney, for her, she said, the great thing about our graduate program is the structure of the cohorts, which allows you to have a group of peers going through similar experiences as you. When I left for Austin, it was a new city that I knew. It was a new city where I knew one person from undergrad. This experience was now unique to me, as my new colleagues had been in the role for at least 2 years when I just joined. So I don't know. I mean, I think that was one of my other concerns too. Like as I begin my own job search of like going into new cities, it's really starting that new support system again. It's like I don't have my cohort anymore. Like I can't say like, hey, like this happened like at my office, whatever. Let's talk about it, let's debrief. Or like, oh, we're talking about this group project. You know, what do you think about that? And so it's different. Like the accessibility, folks, you can't just call someone up and like, hey, like, can we talk? Like, can we meet right now to like really debrief and actually have that? I wouldn't say like not physical intimacy, but like being in the same proximity as them to really offer that support. I don't know, Amanda or Janet, if you want to add on to what Brianne and Daphney sent in.
I think I would definitely agree with that. My situation was a little bit different because I went from a large institution to another really large institution. Rutgers has a very large residence life department, so I was not the only RLE to be starting my first year this year. So it was kind of nice because they set us up kind of like a cohort model. So there's about 4 or 5 other individuals who kind of all started at the same time as me. I think you definitely do have to be a lot more intentional because it's really easy because I live in a college town. So most people who are young professionals in this area are somehow affiliated with Rutgers. And you have to be careful to make sure you're also trying to make some connections that aren't within your institution, because I think inevitably, especially, I don't know if it's more so within residence life, but even if you're trying just to go get dinner with another colleague, eventually your conversation ends up being about work, which is it's actually really hard to avoid because it's something that, because we live here and we work here, it's almost like it's really hard to kind of separate that from life, versus if you can make friends or make connections that aren't related to residence life or even related to your institution, it's a little bit easier to maybe figure out what other things that you can talk about other than how many transports happened or how that program went. And I think it's also, I mean, I was lucky because 2 of my friends from my cohort actually ended up on the East Coast as well, just not within the same state as me. So I think getting used to the fact that now I have to plan a couple months in advance to meet up with them versus just being able to like, oh, I'm bored tonight, let's all go to movies, and they live across the hall from me. So I think the whole proximity thing is something that's difficult to get used to.
Yeah, I agree. I think maintaining your support networks, Arlen, you made a really good point where it's much easier, as a grad student, or if you have lots of friends in if you're at an institution for 2 or 3 years where it's automatic that you're going to drop by somebody's house or their apartment. But particularly in your first or second year in a position, one of the things that I say to tons of folks, that are in their first professional position, because I still have to remind myself of it too, is to maintain, your networks outside, right? I think when you get so immersed in your first year of a position that it can be really difficult to continue to maintain your friendships or your mentor friendships and the folks that have really helped you get to where you're going to be, and now you're kind of there and you're so excited and you're trying to figure out furniture and your schedule and, oh my gosh, where's that building, because I have a meeting in it but I have no idea where it is. Taking some time every month to like write that email to a former supervisor to continue to stay connected to them, for lots of reasons. But for me, that outside perspective of support is incredibly important, especially in your first year or 2 in a position, because you can you can go through such a culture shock of like, that's not how I would do it, or is that really what's happening? And the other folks around you, whether or not they're new or they've been at the institution for 5 or 6 years, that other person who used to supervise you or who was even a peer or a colleague, you can call up and say, I need to vent in a way that's going to feel safe, or that you're going to remind me of like a little bit of what I would have said if I wasn't at this institution, right? I think that's important because you don't always get to do that when you're brand new, because you have to really figure out the climate and the folks that you're working with and what that looks like.
Great. So I guess we'll transition into the next question. So what criteria did you take into account when deciding a new city to live in? And I can share Brianne and Daphne's responses first if you two need more time.
Sure, yeah.
Okay. So with Brianne, let's see. So for her, she asked really powerful questions for herself. So for her, questions were, is there room for growth in the office you're applying to work in the institution? What does the institution value? What types of professional development are available in the area? And then personally, could I see myself raising a family here? What is the local culture like? She also goes on to say that if you're visiting campuses for interviews, she highly recommends folks to make an effort to explore the surrounding neighborhood and city. So while much of your life will be spent at work, it's important to find comfort in the activities, restaurants, sites, and scenes outside of your workplace as well. And then for Daphne, let's see. I looked up information about the young professional scene, so nightlife, availability of young professional committees, other activities I enjoyed, and close enough to a major airport for trips home. I also looked at the number of higher ed institutions in the area, thinking further down the line of how I could advance my career, but possibly transition to a new institution if the opportunities presented themselves.
Yeah, I would say initially it was very nerdy. I had a map of the U.S. And I just said, here are the states I don't want to apply to, or I don't want to, apply for positions in a particular state, because I had crisscrossed, and lived in a bunch of different cities, and so I was really, really open. I didn't have a huge tie to family, and at the time my partner, was very open and said, wherever you want to go. And I had lived in California on and off for about 10 years between various stints in LA and in San Francisco. So part of me, even though I feel really comfortable and consider it to an extent kind of a second home, knew that particularly Res Life really affords you the opportunity to be adventurous if that feels comfortable for you, because you will automatically, usually in an entry-level or pseudo-entry-level position, get an apartment, right? So you don't have to worry about figuring out rent and is this going to be the thing and can I afford it and commuting. So I was really, really adventurous and wanted that. I thought that I wanted to be in a city. I thought that I wanted the accessibility of mass transit. I really missed mass transit. No offense to LA. I know, it's getting there. The Expo line's great, but, I thought that's what I wanted. But then I ended up in a place where I drive everywhere. And it's what I consider to be really rural, because the criteria, and it sounds really, really sort of like a pat answer, but it was about fit. It was about, do I like these people? Do I think I want to be around these people? Again, especially if you live on campus, you live and work and you're around the folks quite a bit in Res Life. And so you don't always go home in the same way that you might potentially at another type of position. And so it was about, what does the institution stand for? Similarly to Brianne's answer. And opportunities for growth. Are there potential either lateral positions that seem really interesting, potentially outside of a functional area, or mid-level positions that could be opening up? And will I be nurtured into those positions by the dean of students? And what kind of interactions will I have with folks in larger positions of leadership was really, really important for me. And that's what I found at Bard, and continue to find that, which has been really great for me. And I wanted to be at a school, I think, that was smaller than USC. And so that was a criteria, because I wanted to learn more about different parts of student affairs. I had worked in, in a few different areas, but I knew that I wanted to do EOP work, and because it was a small institution, I get to do it, and I get to work with PASA scholars now, which may not have happened at another school.
I think for me, I knew I was going to do a nationwide search because I was looking more for what the position was. I was really open in terms of like location because I wanted to work in res life, but I also really wanted to work with international students as a population. So I was targeting schools that were offering positions that would allow me to do both of those things. And to echo Amanda, it really did come down to fit for me. When I ended up doing my on-campus interviews, Rutgers was just the place that I felt that I would be able to be creative, and especially as somebody who's going into an entry-level position, I didn't want to put myself in a place where my job duties would only be like a hall director position, and I wouldn't be able to do things that would kind of interest me outside of that, because I'd done that for 2 years at USC, and I knew I was going to need something more to keep me somewhere. So all the places that I ended up interviewing at were places that were going to be able to offer me some sort of dual role. And when I came for the interview, I think part of it is, even though Rutgers is really big and our office is really big, it's kind of like 4 campuses all kind of smushed together into one giant campus. So even though we have a lot of people who work at my level, in my office there's only 4 of us, plus a supervisor. And then we have grads as well. But I got along really well with the people when I was doing my on-campus there, and it really kind of sealed it for me, because whatever I was pitching in terms of what I wanted to do, they seemed like they would be very supportive of that. And I wanted to work somewhere where I would have that flexibility. And I mean, I've been here for about a semester now, and it's definitely that's kind of what's happened. So I would say, even though like there are places that may seem great on paper, I think it really does show through when you do the on-campus interview, because there were places that if you'd asked me what my top 5 list was before going to TPE, Rutgers wasn't even on that list. So things will change really quickly, because at the end of the day, like especially res life, you work with these people probably more than you would in a traditional office setting, because you're on duty with them, you're programming with them, and you want to be around people that you want to be around, that have the same values as you, that kind of share the same kind of drive and work ethic.
Great. So I guess we'll move on to the next question. So what difficulties did you experience when you relocated? What were things you didn't expect after you relocated? It's very interesting what Brianne shared, so I'll read all of it in its entirety. Although I was excited to move to the Bay Area and had visited frequently, I knew the area as a visitor. For example, I had never grocery shopped for the week or had to make a run to the closest Target, etc. And truthfully, I'm still finding my bearings and find it exciting to explore a new territory in my free time. Professionally, it also took me some time to learn Berkeley's systems and culture. In student affairs, we all speak in acronyms, so it was like adjusting to a whole new campus world and language at the same time. The pace, the culture, the student population, everything was new to me. I joked with my friends before I moved that I would be a loner with nothing but Netflix when I moved. And while I still love an introverted night with my Netflix account, I've been surprised at how many fun and intellectually stimulating opportunities are out there, if you look for them. No one knows better than you whether a job or a city is right for you. You can never fully plan your next move, but if you keep an open mind, I'm sure you'll be pleasantly surprised at how awesome these new experiences can be. For Daphney, I miss the support of friends that I could simply call up for a last minute. You need to be okay with trying things on your own and branching out to meet people. I joined Meetup, church, alumni clubs for my alma mater. Huge shout out to USC Alumni Association in Austin for welcoming me, as well as the Alum Club for my sorority. I found consistency in the foodie group as it allowed me to see different parts of the city and surrounding areas. Another fun thing are the trivia nights at local spots. Some teams are looking for additional team members. Again, I have to emphasize uncomfortable to allow yourself the best experience in your new home.
I think the thing that has surprised me the most is the weather here. I have really only lived on the West Coast, and they told me it was going to be cold, but it was like -6 with wind chill last night, and nothing I own could have prepared me for that. So I think in my head I was like, oh, it's winter. Like I've done winter before. Like I'll be fine. I mean, I don't think that there's anything that could have prepared me for this, especially LA. People are wearing sweaters and stuff in 45-degree weather versus, I don't know, and the fact that we get so much weather here too, like in terms of professionally, like when I do a lot of like event planning, and I was really surprised when they're like, okay, so you want to do this program on this date, what's your snow date? And I was like, what's my what? Because I mean, in LA, you just assume that it's going to be nice and it's going to be sunny, and you don't really think twice about it. Versus here, pretty much from like November until April, any event that we plan, we have to pick a snow date, and that was surprising to me. And being concerned about like students having to travel outside to get to a program, which I mean, USC. I mean, I think the only time we would worry about that is if there's an earthquake or something like that. But and then also just like the names here, because I think I couldn't pronounce the name of my own building for the first month or so, or the name of some of the surrounding towns, and I thought like Google Maps would help me, but Google Maps just gets it even more wrong. So like. And I don't know, it's a different way of life here. Like the way people speak is a little bit different. I've been learning lots of East Coast slang, which I think is slang, but it may also come from Real Housewives. I'm never too sure.
Damn it, thrill us with something. I want to. I love it. That's great.
But I mean, I think any of my difficulties, they haven't been too difficult. Like a lot of the times it was actually a really good avenue for having conversations with people in my office and some of our campus partners that I wouldn't have had otherwise, because it's something that I can ask questions about and they feel like they can continue having a conversation about too. Because I mean, if I walk in and they're like, why do you not have socks on? You know you can't wear ballet flats for the rest of winter. It's something that you can kind of bond over almost, and they make fun of me, but in a good-hearted way, about the fact that I pretty much wear a winter coat and I don't take it off inside or outside. Like, I never have to change my outfit because you'll never know the difference.
Or an outfit is wasted when you wear your coat the whole day. I feel that way sometimes. You're like, man, it was so good, but nobody saw it.
Yeah, there'll be days when I'm like, man, I look cute today. Nobody's gonna notice.
Sure.
No, I mean, I'm taking every excuse to buy as many pairs of boots as I ever wanted, because I wanted to buy them in LA and never bought them, and now I'm just like, well, I need them because it gets cold here. And also, everybody I know is crocheting or knitting something right now.
Oh,
so
wow.
That's definitely a hobby that I'm going to be picking up. I mean, I understand it. Like, it would be very strange to be like, oh yeah, I love to knit and crochet, and it's like 65 degrees outside in February. Versus here, it makes sense. You like stay warm and you're doing something productive.
I know a lot of people that are also knitting. Two of my coworkers knit. They go to there's not conferences, like fairs or like events for knitting. Yeah, I had no idea it existed. There was like this thing that they all took off work for, and they were like, you have to be on duty for that. And I was like, what? We're going to go buy yarn, and it was very exciting. Yeah, I think I would echo a lot of what Janet said. Like, even though I am from the East Coast, I had been in California for back to New York. Last winter actually was like one of the worst winters in like X amount of years. People were like, "Ooh, how are you doing?" And there was like 6 feet of snow, and I was like, "I'm all right, I'm okay. It's cold outside." Yeah, the dean of students also would yell at me because I wasn't wearing socks. Because I was like, I lived in LA. I don't need to wear socks with my topsider. She actually brought me a bag of socks and was like, here, take. I mean, like, it was ridiculous. This is true story. And I was like, oh, okay. So I have some socks from her. I think, I would echo a lot of what was said previously. The student population, absolutely. When I was applying to Bard, and went on campus for the interview, they really sort of drilled me about the kind of student that goes to Bard, and that they're different. They are different than any other student you will ever know. And coming from USC, all the things that people assume about USC, and they're like, you're not going to get what a Bard student is like, because a Bard student is this. And I was like, I think I'll be fine. But adjusting to what being at a small selective liberal arts school is like, and students take themselves seriously, and what they expect from you intellectually is very different. They expect you to have read important pieces, and they expect you to be able to speak about philosophers that they're also reading about. And so the academic rigor, was a little bit different, and they expected that like from their AC, which was slightly different than what I expected. But I thought, yeah, I can do that, because so many of the interviews that I went to, they said, the Bard student is weird. These are some weird students, but we like them, and you have to like weird. You have to not be exasperated by weird. And I thought, okay, but that's an adjustment, right? Like the literal kind and type of student. And I think the adjustment that a lot of people don't always talk about is, I also went to TPE, and it's such a process, and there's so much expectation and so much money and like emotion that goes into all of it. And then you hit like the 6-month period in your position, and there are some things that are going to be disappointing, or you like thought that you'd be really close to this person that you really enjoyed and connected with in an interview, and maybe that like hasn't happened yet, or hasn't happened in a way that you thought, or there are things that are disappointing or really frustrating about the office, and they might be really small things, right? But a little bit of the shine and the glitter sort of fades, and you're like in the rhythm of the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think that's an adjustment, like Bard for me, last spring when I had been here for, I had the fall semester under my belt, and I was like, okay, I got this. And then we had a few student deaths, and there was a lot that happened on campus that really shifted your adjustment, because you just have to sort of be able to be on the fly and go with whatever's happening on the campus at the time. I was still like adjusting, and we had to support students who had lost students, in an accident. And it wasn't about me and my adjustment and where the building was anymore, or like, oh, I'm really frustrated that they don't do it this way, or why don't they, practice this particular thing that we did at USC. It was about the students again. And so I think what I would say to PASA folks that are job searching is to remember that, right? Like the 6-month period or whatever period is going to hit, and there are days where it's not going to be what you thought, but hopefully most days are good, or you feel useful, or you feel like you were able to support a student, and it's a little bit bigger than you, and the fact that you thought it was going to be amazing all the time, because that's just not how life is, for the most part. Remembering that the institution, you should believe in what the institution is putting out there and how they're supporting students at the end of the day.
So we'll transition into our last question. And I think some of you have touched upon this in your earlier statements. So how did your support system change when you moved to a new city? And again, I can share Brianne and Daphne's responses. Let's see. So Brianne, I still rely heavily on my family and friends for support, but rather the way in which I connect with them is different. The majority of my friends are located in Southern California, so we talk on the phone, email, or have regular Google Hangouts with a glass of wine. You would be surprised how amazing technology is at allowing us to all keep in touch. It's just a matter of recognizing that and putting in the extra effort on both sides. Now, when I do see family and friends in person, I value the time we spend together that much more. Over the past few months, I've also grown closer with my coworkers and reconnected with old friends in the area. They've also become a part of my support system in the Bay Area. For Daphney, there's three things that she talks about. So it's time change, branch out, and plan ahead. So for time change, it may require to schedule times with your friends and family for phone calls or Google Hangout sessions. This actually made a group of 5 of us closer because they set up dates with me, but all 5 of us would catch up. Branch out. I was lucky to have amazing coworkers at my new positions, but I had to be careful not to lean on them too much. They were extremely gracious to include me in their happenings, but I need to make my own network too. This will help to not strain your working relationships as well. Plan ahead. If this is the time in your life that your friends are getting married or your nieces and nephews are growing up, whatever the reason, you need to set your finances and plans up to help this. Who will take you to the airport? Is there a good dog sitter for hire? If 2 events are back-to-back weekends, do you have enough vacation time to stay out there for a week, or do you have to pick just one?
Yeah, I think I talked a little bit about how my support network definitely changed, but I think for me, yeah, there are going to be times where you rely on the immediate people that you're working with, and you get really accustomed and used to that. But I think also branching out is super important, and I think that's, everybody sort of says it, but the folks that you may not know, you know, inviting them to lunch, or you get to have that as an excuse as a new person, right? You get to sort of schedule these things and say, like, I just want to get to know you, or what do you do for fun? And the maintaining aspect of it for me has been very, very important. Maintaining my friendships, not getting so caught up in work or being exhausted from being on duty, or, you know, making excuses and saying I'm just going to stay in on a Saturday. Really pushing yourself to maintain your support networks, those that, you know, are your friends, but also the folks that are your mentors or that used to supervise you, because I found that to be really invaluable when I need a perspective that's outside of BARD. You know, it's incredibly important to, whether or not you're working on a program or an initiative, or you're just frustrated because you think that's not how I would have done that, and you get to sort of vent at someone, and they can be a really great support for you. But I think also my support network has changed in that you have to be able to be okay with being a little lonely, because even if you move with a partner, or even if you have a couple of friends at work that you hang out with all the time, or even if you have a few friends in the greater area, there are going to be times where you're going to think, this was a hard day, and I kind of wish that I could hang out with somebody, and that's not necessarily going to be a reality. So being comfortable being alone, or knowing what things you're going to rely on when you're feeling kind of burned out or unsupported, even if it's in the moment, right? Like, are you going to go to the gym? Are you going to go for a walk? Are you going to do yoga? You know, what are those things that you're okay doing by yourself? And pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, I think, is important, because some days are going to feel probably lonelier than others, regardless of how many friends you have in the area.
I think for me, because I'm an introvert, so I have to remember that every time I move to a new place, like, your support network, it takes time to build. Like, it's never going to be instantaneous, kind of no matter where you end up going. So just like reminding myself that, you know, when I started my master's program, like, I didn't come with a network of friends. That came over time. And then also, like, because I am introvert, like, my tendency is to want to go home and become best friends with Netflix, But I mean, part of it is a benefit of working in residence life is that you have this community of people who also live on campus. And so kind of saying yes to things, like if people reach out to you and say, oh, we're doing this, or we're all going out to happy hour or something, and just saying yes and going out and meeting more people, because that's how you get connected into the network. It's something that has to happen naturally. I think in terms of keeping in contact with people from back home or friends from PASA, Skype and FaceTime have definitely helped so much. I don't know what I would have done before that, but making sure to have consistent contact with them, either scheduling something on a weekly basis, or sometimes it doesn't work out and doing it on a monthly basis. I think it's really helpful. It's been really helpful for me in my transition here, because it is my first student affairs position. So being able to vent with other people that know me and know who I am, and sharing your own frustrations with maybe something that happened at work that day and you don't really know how to process that. Because especially for people who are also in residence life, there are some things that are echoed no matter what institution you're at that are frustrating. And it's nice to not feel like you're kind of going crazy. Because there'll be sometimes where a situation will happen, you'll just be like, what just happened? And you need someone to kind of support you. And I think that's been really helpful for me, because they don't work at the same institution as you do. They know you outside of what you do in your position. So they can be that support. And it's also a safe space to kind of vent. Because I don't think any institution is perfect. Like, no matter how shiny their pamphlet may be, I mean, at the end of the day, like, every place you work at is going to have things that don't work as well as your experience at previous institutions. And then on the other side, there's things that you do at your current job that you're like, why didn't I do this at my previous job? That would have made my life so much easier. Or I think at the end of the whatever time that you're there, as long as the good kind of outweighs the bad, I think you're probably doing well. I think it's just a balance and kind of going into it not expecting everything to come out perfectly. And I think it goes with maintaining your networks too. Like, there will be people that you just drift apart from. Either your schedules don't match up, and or you just there's not going to be that proximity that keeps you together. And then there's people who I won't have talked to or seen in person for like months, and then you reconnect and it's like you saw them last week. So I think just being okay with that and understanding that your network is going to change regardless of how much effort you might put in. It's a relationship. So I think just being okay with that too, and knowing that there will be people that are going to come into your life, and there are going to be people that are going to leave, and just being okay with that.
So a lot of things that both of you mentioned, like it's reminding me of how like this whole idea of like relocating to a new city, like it is full of new possibilities. Pun. But hashtag possibilities right here. But just the idea of how like you're gonna have opportunities to do a lot of new things, and that it really is pushing you out of your comfort zone and into your growth zone. And just hearing both of you speak, it reminds me of this one question that I picked up from a while ago in my AmeriCorps program, like when it comes to like trying to really stay in my growth zone rather than staying in my comfort zone. And it kind of like speaks to Janet about you saying yes to things. Because for me, like, I often find myself posing this question to me about what's the cost if I don't do this, and can I be okay if I do it or if I don't? Because I know that for me at least, like, I try to be intentional with my growth, and that like going into a new city and a new situation, being on my own, like it is scary. Like sometimes I find myself daunted by the idea of like things are going to change drastically. Or not drastically, but like in a good amount, like after May. and that I know I'm going to be really out of my comfort zone. And if I really am committed to how I want to grow, I really have to challenge myself and really try to hold myself accountable to that. Um, so yes. So it looks like we have one viewer, but there's no questions. So I guess we'll transition into our closing remarks. So if you have any final thoughts or comments or takeaways that you want our viewers online and in the future.
I think because student affairs is super flexible for wherever you want to be in the country, I think you should take advantage of that if you can, especially if you don't have, obviously everybody's situation is different. You may have some reasons why you are location bound, but if you aren't, I really encourage people to kind of look outside of where they're comfortable being, because there aren't very many positions where you can just pick up and work in another state or sometimes another country for a couple of years, because you can always come back. I think if you decide that you go somewhere and you try it out and you're 2 years in or 3 years in and you're like, I don't know if this is for me long term, you can always either try another place or go back to where you're comfortable. But I always encourage people to, if they can, and obviously it's different for everyone, but if it's something that you want to do, I think it's a great opportunity to kind of explore and see what else there is on offer.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of my mantra too. And I think, also not even location, but just sort of type of institution too. I think, I loved being at USC. It was fantastic. I had a wonderful experience there, working in multiple different offices. And so I thought that I felt really comfortable in a large system, because there was, like maybe more money and maybe more people, and maybe that meant something, and it does, right? But there are things that also don't always work as well, too. But I think being open to being in a completely different location, but also a completely different kind of school than you went to as an undergrad or at USC. My undergrad institution was an art institution in New York City. I have a BFA, and so while I had tons of friends when I was in college that were at like small liberal arts schools, that has never been my experience ever. So I didn't know what that meant, but there was something about it that, in some small ways, like it also encourages your own intellectual and academic growth too, because the conversations that the students are having, you either can speak to or they are exciting and you want to learn more about what they're actually learning about, which for me made being at Bard that much more interesting. So opening yourself up to institution type, thinking about, if you have always been at privates, thinking about what it means to be at a public school, and the equity and access that comes with that, right? And what that might mean for you within student affairs. So type of institution with locale, I would definitely encourage folks. And nothing is forever, as Janet said, like you could do it for 2 years, it could be amazing, it could be rough. It could be somewhere in the middle. And I know California is awesome, and I have tons of love for it, but get out for a second, leave, and then come back. There are so many schools that are in the Southern California region, right? And so take a chance. I think USC and PASA really encourages ambition, and you're going to be prepared. You just have to sort of say, I can do it. And get out there and try.
So it looks like we actually have a question from our live viewer, our very first one from Brianne Wada. So she's asking, did you consider cost of living in your search? And she did mention that she does recognize that it might be skewed because both of you are in resident. Like, if you could kind of speak to that at all.
I did a little bit, because obviously the cost of living in New Jersey is higher than it would be to live in Oregon or Washington. So on kind of like a geeky side note, like I definitely researched, like I went and did like cost of living analysis just to see how much it would cost, because I mean, granted, it is res life, so I knew I wasn't going to have to pay rent or utilities. Um, but at the same time, we all have loans that we have to pay. And also, like, I mean, I think it's important to consider that because um, you want to be able to make sure that it is a professional position. So most likely your position is going to come with retirement, and how much is your income tax going to be? How expensive is it going to be to have a car if you need a car in the area? Because that's something that I didn't need when I was in LA, but I purchased a car when I got to New Jersey because even though we have public transportation, a car is still the way that most people get around here. Um, and how much is your health care going to cost? And I mean, it's something to think about. Like, what are the things that you need to be happy? Um, if Because I knew that I was going to be on the other coast, like I didn't want to be somewhere where I was going to have to drive or pay an extra fee just to get to the airport, um, and then to go back home. So those are definitely things that I considered. But I know that there's a bunch of websites that you can go and just plug in like what your salary might be, and for some schools it might be harder than others to figure out what your salary is going to be. Because public schools it's really easy, because it's they have to disclose it, so you can just usually Google it and the title. Private schools, it can be a little more difficult. You may not find out what your salary range is going to be until you're already at the on-campus round for some places. And that for some people, it's sad, but even though that school might be the best fit for you professionally, um, if it's not paying you enough to what your needs are, and again, everyone's are different, but it's something that you do have to realistically take into consideration.
Yeah, I mean, res life does make things in some ways, easier in terms of cost of living, but absolutely. I think more than cost of living, it was going to be for me about what was the cost to me personally and professionally of living there, right? Like sort of reversing the question. And I'm living in a place that's 2 hours from New York City, and if somebody said that to me 2 years ago, I would have said, you're out of your mind. Like, I would never do that. But I'm here. I also am leasing a car. I hate driving, like it's about the adventure piece. I drive to the hospital 2 in the morning, and it's a very odd thing because I never really grew up driving. But the cost of what does it mean to me to be potentially in that city or place, right? And will I get what I need out of it? Like, if you really need a Starbucks, like, it sounds ridiculous, right? But like, I live in a place where the closest Starbucks, I have to cross a bridge. It's like 20 minutes. Whereas like, you wouldn't think about that stuff. Or does that stuff not matter? Like, are you so used to sort of creature comforts of living in LA or what you expect LA to have, whether it's like particular kinds of food or, particular kind or type of diversity? Will that matter in the end to you versus how much money, you're going to be making or taking home? Because the loans certainly do kick in with a vengeance. And you have to kind of figure out what that means, for you. But the cost of living for me made sense because I could still get a little bit of the city feel. But I kind of was appreciative of being in a place that is on like 500 acres because it was such a vast difference. And so that cost for me is a little bit of a slower pace of life, which for a few years of my life right now is okay and makes sense for me.
All right. Well, we'll go back into our closing. So I just want to thank all of our wonderful alumni that contribute to this Google Hangout. And I definitely appreciate Brianne for submitting the first question ever on these Google Hangouts, because now I know how it works. So next month's topic is EDD versus PhD. So everyone have a wonderful Thursday, and until next time, fight on!